what America was and what it can become. This is Liberty Town Hall.
On today's Liberty Town Hall, we're going to give up the helm to Greg Groninger. We're going to talk about a thing called Agenda 21. Those of you who are familiar, you're going to be appreciative of what you hear today and some of the latest information on the topic. If you're not familiar, man, do you need to be paying attention. This is big stuff. And Greg's going to be here to give us the full details of it. We'll stand down. He'll be here next on Liberty Town Hall.
Hello, this is Greg Groninger coming to you from the great state of Michigan today. And I'd like to speak to you about a creation of the United Nations called Agenda 21. Many of you may have never heard of Agenda 21. More likely you've heard of sustainable development. Maybe you haven't even heard of sustainable development. It's really a nonpartisan issue, but I just can't resist. I have to say that Bush did it. And what I mean by Bush did it was the first President Bush in 1992, he swore our allegiance to Agenda 21 when he signed a treaty with the UN for the implementation of Agenda 21. Now you realize that just the President signing it does not make it the supreme law of the land because our Senate never has approved it. But in 1993, President Clinton signed an executive order and he established the President's Council on Sustainable Development, and every department within the executive department was to start to implement Agenda 21. Because another treaty we have, the Vienna Treaty, says we shall, if the President signs a treaty, we shall do our best effort within the laws that we currently have to implement that program. So Bush did it, he did it in 92, and Clinton started to implement it. Well, why haven't most of us heard about it? I never heard about it until 2008. Well, Gary Lawrence was an advisor to President Clinton for the President's Council on Sustainable Development. And a quote directly from Gary was, participating in a UN advocated planning process would most likely bring out the conspiracy fixated groups and individuals in our society. This segment of our society would actively work to defeat elected officials who would implement local Agenda 21. So we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. So that's probably why you have never heard of Agenda 21, the great creation of the United Nations. It also comes with a lot of other names. They've gotten very creative with their wording over the years. Like I say, smart growth, growing smart, shaping our future. We all want to shape and plan for our future. Green communities, sustainable development, protecting our ecosystems. It's very, very difficult to argue with names like these. And best practices. We all want to find the best way to do things. So we all know that not planning is planning to fail. So what can really be wrong? Well, the best way I've come to understand, and my feeling of it, is there's a darker side to sustainable development, other than the nice words that they've used to describe it. It's a lot like a basket of fruit. You have one bad apple down buried deeply in that basket of fruit, and it can spoil the whole basket. And this is something that's covertly being pushed into our local communities. And it is a comprehensive plan of extreme environmentalism, social engineering, and global political control. So it is quite elusive, it's quite stealth in its practices. And it targets private property rights. Sustainable development views the American way of life, of private property ownership, of single-family homes and private car ownership, individual travel choices and privately owned farms, is all destructive to our environment. It's very hard to believe, but this is directly from the agenda and what has been said by many of the people. Social justice is accomplished by socialism and redistribution of wealth. Another way to describe what is going on with the UN's agenda. By having, it's always nice to kind of know the people behind the development of such an agenda. And so to quote to you Maurice Strong, who was the Secretary General of the UN Earth Summit in '92 when Bush signed his treaty, a direct quote from him is, "Current lifestyle and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, suburban housing, are all unsustainable." You've most likely heard of the Meatless Mondays that have been talked about just recently. These are all things that they feel that are not sustainable. To add to the list, coming from the UN's Biodiversity Assessment Report, was ski runs, grazing of livestock, building of fences, single-family homes, paved and tarred roads, logging activities, dams and reservoirs. Here in Michigan, we've just experienced I call it a real disaster on the Boardman River, where they removed some of those dams and destroyed a lot of private property of individuals living along that beautiful river. Power line construction is also considered unsustainable. And our environment won't support these things according to the agenda. Also, Harvey Rubin, who is the vice chairman of ICLEI, which we'll speak about here in just a moment, also involved in the Wildlands Project, another project we'll talk about, has defined and said that individual rights will have to take a backseat to the collectivism. So if you do recall from the first President Bush, when he came up with his New World Order speech, that was right after signing of Agenda 21. And it's all about creating global governance. And global governance is not an event. It's a process. It's a movement. And it's a philosophy that government is the source of individual rights, and that they extend those rights to the individuals in view of the interest of the community, best interest of the community. If we go to the actual agenda, which is up on your website now, you can look down through, and there they describe their agenda as the agenda of a comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations, the United Nations systems, and major groups in every area which impact the environment. So right after our break, we'll come back and discuss this just a little bit further. This is Greg Groninger again, and as we were talking before the break, that we discussed some of the founders and what their thoughts are about how Agenda 21 should reshape our future. And as we said, Agenda 21 is that comprehensive plan of action that's to be taken, locally and globally by all of the major groups in every area in which we impact the environment. So how do they go about doing this? They need some help, and their help comes from NGOs, which are non-governmental organizations. And if you go to the UN's website, you'll actually find that in North America, we have over 3,800 NGOs involved as certified NGOs within the United Nations to help with the implementation of, you call it whatever you want, Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, Smart Growth, Growing Smart. You pick the fine words, but there's 3,800 out there. On your screen, you'll see a list of some of those NGOs that are involved. And I'm going to talk specifically about three of them. The Club of Rome, the Open Society Foundation by good old George Soros, and ICLEI, which has been announced across the country and is starting to find a lot of resistance within the local communities. And another one is American Planning Association. I won't speak much about it, but that's where a lot is coming down to our local communities, is through the planning departments. And our local planning departments are inundated with information coming from the American Planning Association, an NGO of the United Nations supporting Agenda 21. So from the Club of Rome, you might recall there was a book written by them. It was called The First Global Revolution. And this was written and published in 1991. And direct quote from there It would seem that men and women need a common motivation, namely a common adversary, to organize and put together, act together in a vacuum. Such motivation seems to have ceased to exist or yet to have been found. The need for enemies seems to be a common historical factor, bringing the divided nation together to face an outside enemy, either one, a real one, or one invented for the purpose. Now that's rather nefarious. They go on to say, in searching for this new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, remember this is in 1991 they wrote the book, but to come to unite us together, they came up with the idea of pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortage, famine, and the like would fit the bill. The real enemy then is humanity itself. They go on within the book to say democracy will be made to seem responsible for the lagging economy, the scarcity and uncertainty, and the very concept of democracy could be brought into question and allow for the seizure of power. That is one of the NGOs behind Agenda 21, which belongs to the United Nations, which we have adopted. The Open Society, they're very much focused on media program, journalism, media management training, and it's all funded by George Soros, another one of the NGOs pushing Agenda 21. He's been involved in a number of different segments of the UN meetings and things. One in 2007 was the 7th Global Forum on Reinventing Government. Let me move on to ICLEI. This is in over 600 communities through the United States and 1,200 across the world. ICLEI stands for the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. And their stated goal, if you go to their website, is international goals. Our programs and projects promote participatory, long-term strategic planning processes and address local sustainability while protecting global common good. This approach links local action to internationally agreed upon goals and targets such as Agenda 21 and the Rio Convention. That is ICLEI's stated goal. In our great state of Michigan, we have Detroit, Grand Rapids, Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, Clinton County, Ferndale, Grand Traverse County, Traverse City are all part of ICLEI, or have been a part of ICLEI at some time. You can go to their website and find if your community is one of them. Now the funders, people who are funding it, now remember this is an NGO, there's 23 funders you'll find on the ICLEI website, but I want to bring up 3 of those. One of the funders is the environmental protection. Our own EPA is funding a non-governmental organization, along with our U.S. State Department, and from Michigan here, the University of Michigan Public Health from Ann Arbor. They're funders. Also, if you look at their ICLEI's partner page, which there's 39 partners, you might want to go look at that website and see if you recognize any. But again, we have the Environmental Protection Agency. We have the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories, another government supporter. NOAA is also supporting it. University of Texas at Arlington, Yale University, and we also have the Conference of Mayors. So our mayors get inundated with stuff from ICLEI about Agenda 21 and sustainable development. So they probably don't know where all this is coming from, but they do get this. Another one is the President's Climate Action Project. And going to their website, they state their mission is the Presidential Climate Action Project was created in 2007 to develop policy recommendations on climate and energy security with a focus on what the next President of the United States could accomplish using his or her executive authority. In other words, without action by the Congress. Now, these are some of the NGOs that are behind the implementation of Agenda 21. So after the break, we'll take on a little bit more. This is Greg Groninger, and we'll finish up a little bit here on Agenda 21 by looking at their actual document itself. Now there's 40 chapters and we're not going to drag through 40, but I did want to point out a couple places. So if you go to their website and you link down through their documents, you'll come to one called Changing Consumption Patterns. And let's see if this rings a bell with you. It's called Moving Toward Environmentally Sound Pricing, and it's at 4.25. Some progress has begun in the use of appropriate economic instruments to influence consumer behavior. These instruments include environmental charges, taxes, deposit refund systems, etc. This process should be encouraged in light of country-specific conditions. Remember, this is a global effort. Without the stimulus of price and market signals that make clear to producers and consumers the environmental costs of the consumption of energy, materials, natural resources, and the generation of waste, significant changes in consumption and production patterns seem unlikely to occur in the near future. So that's in their chapter 4. Doesn't that sound a little bit like Cap and Tax did? They're also involved with our children, and it's children and youth and sustainable development. So let's see what they have to say there. Government should take active steps to, one, is mobilize communities through the schools and local health centers so that the children and their parents become effective focal points for the sensitization of the community to environmental issues. So they're in our schools with a lot of the NGO help. Let me take another one. It's integrated approach to planning and management of land resources. And if we go to our EPA website, which is entitled Green Communities, you'll see a transportation action plan. This comes from their toolkit that they have out there for green communities. They also have one for smart communities in case you'd rather be a smart community than a green one. But the transportation action plan says a green community uses and encourages modes of travel other than the automobile. Streets and circulation patterns encourage pedestrian movement, increase opportunities for pedestrian and bicycle facilities, and encourage mixed use to allow the integration of residential, employment, and commercial centers. This goes right along with all the bicycling trails, and I'm not against bicycling because I do a lot of it myself, but we certainly don't need trails in all the places we're having them. Another one is the conservation of our forest lands. And just to give you an idea of some of the impact, the production in 1992, when Bush first signed that treaty, we were producing about 8 billion board feet per year of timber from our national forests. In 2011, we had slightly over 2 billion board feet, almost down only 25% of what we had been when we started. Now, if you look at timber revenues and you take one timber company, Plum Creek Timber Company, they made $572 million from 6.6 million acres of forest that they managed. Our National Forest Service only made $124 million, and they manage 193 million acres of forest land. Almost 30 times as many acres, and only making 1/4 of what Plum Creek did. So it does have impact. Also, if the EPA has a manual, it's called the Community-Based Environmental, a resource book for protecting ecosystems in the community. And in their library, it's listed under the how-to. And if you look at some of the chapters in there, and I'll take chapter 1, it's strategies to consider for ecosystem protection. And they have voluntary strategies such as land acquisitions. They also have strategies using local laws such as zoning, property tax and municipal fees, transfer development rights. These are all direct attacks on our land and our property. The other strategies they have outlined in that chapter is working with federal and state laws to bring about biodiversity. And in this biodiversity program, they're really interested in taking our forests back to pre-colonial times. Is there any wonder that we have some of the wildfires across this country that we've been having if we're managing our forests as pre-colonial times? not picking up the dead wood, not harvesting those trees like they should. It's a tinderbox. This brings me to the biodiversity. There's a big map that many people call the pizza map, but it was a map that really saved our bacon, so to speak, when Dr. Kaufman was able to get this presented to the Senate just before they were to vote on the ratification of the Biodiversity Treaty. But the Wildland Projects is really an attack on the rural communities. And the goal of this, if you look at the map and you see all the red, those are core reserves. Those are roadless areas in our wilderness areas supposedly to allow biodiversity to flourish. Then we have corridors that tie these core reserves together. And again, those have minimal amount of roads so we don't disturb the residential population of wildlife. And then we have buffer zones, 2 or more buffer zones, which are yellow on this map, to really have a gradual increase and get the inner zones with low density and roads.
Glenn, I really appreciate Greg Groninger coming on and talking to us about Agenda 21.
Absolutely.
Big stuff.
Absolutely. I just can't wait to see the second half of his interview. I think that's awesome.
And we're looking forward to it. It is important. What is the UN plan for the world? That's what we're talking about. That's coming up on a future Liberty Town Hall.
But a constitutional government, once changed from freedom, can never be restored. Liberty, once lost, is lost forever. John Adams.